February 14, 1933. Harlem was quiet in the way cities get quiet right before something irreversible happens. No sirens. No shouting. Just cold air, narrow streets, and 12 men moving with professional certainty. They did not rush. They did not joke. Each man knew his position, his weapon, his exit. This was not a robbery. It was not a warning. Dutch Schultz had sent them to end something that refused to bow. Inside the building, Bumpy Johnson waited. He did not pace. He did not look at the clock. He already knew the hour. He had known at the moment the decision was made across town. Men like Schultz believed power traveled loudly. Bumpy understood it, arrived in silence. Footsteps echoed on the stairwell. A hand brushed a wall. A safety clicked off. Confidence moved ahead of caution, because no one expected resistance. Harlem was supposed to fold. That was the message. Then the building changed. A light went out where it should not have. A door closed without sound. One man turned to speak and found no one behind him. There were no gunshots. No screams. Just absence. Space where men had been seconds earlier. Confusion crept in slowly. Hunters sensed too late that they were being counted, not as a group, but as individuals. Certainty thinned. Breathing sharpened. Control slipped without announcing itself. Somewhere inside, Bumpy Johnson remained untouched, unseen. This was not chaos. It was design. None of the 12 had been told everything. They were given orders, not context. They believed numbers were protection, that force multiplied itself automatically, that assumption followed them into the dark. What they encountered instead was memory, territory, and patience layered over years. The walls knew Bumpy Johnson. The silence answered to him. Every step they took had already been anticipated, measured, and allowed. By the time understanding arrived, choice had already left. This was not about survival. It was about sending a fact back to the man who thought he owned Harlem, carried carefully by the only witness who could still walk. Minutes later, one man stumbled back into the street. His coat was intact, his weapon still loaded, but his hands would not stop shaking. He did not run. He did not look back. He carried something heavier than fear. He carried instructions. Harlem did not burn that night. It did not kneel either. And the man who walked away understood the truth before anyone else did. This had never been an ambush. It was a decision. That was the beginning of a war no one announced, and the end of the illusion that violence decides outcomes. From that night forward, Harlem remembered who spoke last. Without raising voices, before that night in Harlem, before Dutch Schultz made his move, before 12 men walked into a building they would not all leave, Bumpy Johnson was already what he needed to be. He did not become powerful in response to threat. He became powerful because he understood people long before they understood themselves. Bumpy was not loud. He did not announce decisions or demand attention. In Harlem, men learned quickly that silence from Bumpy meant more than shouting from anyone else. He listened longer than most, watched closer than anyone, and spoke only when words could no longer be ignored. That alone separated him from the men who confused aggression with authority. Those who worked for him did so by choice, not fear. Loyalty, to Bumpy, was currency more valuable than money. He remembered who stood firm when things went wrong and who disappeared when pressure arrived. Favors were returned precisely. Betrayal was not punished emotionally. It was handled permanently, without spectacle. That consistency made him reliable, and reliability made him dangerous. This was not a story of desperation or sudden rise. Bumpy understood Harlem the way a chess player understands a board he has studied his entire life. Every corner carried history. Every face carried a pattern. He knew who needed protection, who needed patience, and who needed distance. When others rushed to control territory, Bumpy focused on controlling outcomes. Law enforcement recognized it even if they never said it aloud. Arresting Bumpy rarely solved anything. Removing him only created instability they could not manage. He was not chaos. He was balance. That made him less visible, but far more influential. Deals held because he said they would. Conflicts ended because he allowed them to end. While other bosses relied on intimidation, Bumpy relied on memory. He remembered conversations years after others forgot them. He remembered debts that men assumed had disappeared with time. That kind of recall unsettled people. It reminded them that nothing was ever truly finished. Violence, when it came, was never impulsive. It was purposeful, limited, and final. But most of the time, it never came at all. Bumpy preferred solutions that left no echoes. His strength was in prevention, not reaction. Problems rarely reached him because he saw them forming long before they announced themselves. Dutch Schultz did not understand this. Schultz believed dominance had to be displayed repeatedly, louder each time, or it faded. He believed numbers were authority and fear was obedience. To him, Harlem was territory that had resisted long enough to deserve punishment. That was the miscalculation. This confrontation was never about money or routes or pride. It was about control over an idea. Who decided how Harlem functioned? Who set the rules others lived by? Schultz believed force could rewrite that answer. Bumpy understood that force only exposes ignorance. By the time Schultz moved, Bumpy had already evaluated him, already predicted his response, already prepared for the exact kind of pressure that would come. Not because he expected violence, but because he expected arrogance. Bumpy Johnson was not reactive. He was inevitable. What followed did not change him. It revealed him. And for the first time, those watching would understand the difference between a man who takes power and a man who embodies it. Dutch Schultz had never been comfortable with resistance. He understood opposition only as something temporary, something that existed until it was crushed loudly enough. Harlem unsettled him because it did not respond the way other territories had. It did not panic. It did not rush to negotiate. It continued operating as if his name carried no special weight. That silence fed his paranoia. Schultz ruled through excess. Excess violence, excess threats, excess displays of control. He believed fear worked best when it was visible, when people felt it before they understood it. In his mind, authority had to be refreshed constantly, like a warning sign repainted before it faded. Harlem refused to acknowledge that logic, and Bumpy Johnson became the symbol of that refusal. To Schultz, Bumpy was not a rival. Rivals negotiated. Rivals could be pressured. Bumpy was a problem, a variable that refused to behave predictably, that made him dangerous in a way Schultz did not respect, only resented. The longer Harlem remained steady under Bumpy's quiet control, the more Schultz felt his own dominance questioned beyond his borders. The decision to send 12 men was not strategic. It was theatrical. 12 was not the minimum required. It was the number chosen to be talked about later. It was meant to overwhelm, to announce, to remind everyone watching that resistance invited spectacle. Schultz wanted the story told before it even happened. He wanted fear to travel faster than facts. What Schultz failed to consider was that Harlem did not measure power by volume. It measured it by continuity. Rumors moved through the streets before any men did. Whispers in backrooms. Pauses in conversation. People sensed pressure forming, the way weather shifts before storm. Something was coming. Everyone felt it. Bumpy did not respond to the rumors publicly. He did not gather men in the open or issue warnings meant to be overheard. He did not fortify in ways that would confirm Schultz's expectations. Instead, he listened. He watched how information traveled, who repeated it accurately, who exaggerated, who stayed quiet. Preparation for Bumpy was not about weapons. It was about awareness. While Schultz paced and planned, Bumpy reviewed patterns. Schultz's history was not mysterious. He escalated when challenged. He overcommit when insulted. He confused decisive action with intelligent action. Those traits made his next move inevitable. Bumpy did not need to guess. He only needed to wait. The contrast between them sharpened as the moment approached. Schultz surrounded himself with noise, reassurance, and affirmation. He needed to feel momentum. Bumpy reduced his presence. Fewer words. Fewer signals. The calmer Harlem became, the more certain Schultz felt something dramatic was required to reassert control. Behind closed doors, Schultz issued the order without hesitation. There would be no intermediaries. No warnings. No messages delivered in advance. Negotiation implied equality, and Schultz refused to acknowledge it. This would be final, clean, overwhelming. No survivors. To Schultz, this was closure. To Harlem, it was intrusion. To Bumpy Johnson, it was confirmation. The threat had taken shape exactly as expected. The pressure was real now, measurable and approaching. And while others felt it tighten, Bumpy felt something else entirely. Relief. Because once a man shows his hand, he gives up the advantage. Schultz had chosen noise over insight, force over understanding. The moment he signed off on those 12 men, the outcome narrowed. The path forward clarified. Whatever followed would not be chaotic. It would be precise. Schultz believed he was ending a problem. In truth, he was defining the terms of his own lesson. The 12 men were not identical. They wore the same coats, carried the same weapons, followed the same orders. But sameness ends quickly when pressure arrives. Inside that group, one man listened more than he spoke. He watched faces, memorized turns, and understood that Harlem was not hostile by default. It was attentive. That awareness separated him before he knew it mattered. This was the fractured Dutch Schultz never considered. He believed loyalty was fixed, that orders erased out. He assumed men moved as units. Bumpy Johnson understood something quieter. Loyalty bent under weight. It cracked when fear met conscience. Someone always talked, not out of weakness, but because tension demanded release. Bumpy did not receive warnings through panic. He noticed shifts. A delay where there should have been urgency. A phrase repeated too carefully. The man who hesitated was not afraid of death. He was afraid of being misunderstood. That distinction mattered. It told Bumpy everything he needed to know. The hit was already in motion when Bumpy made his decision. He would not intercept it loudly. Stopping it publicly would confirm Schultz's narrative. Letting it proceed would rewrite it. Control did not mean avoidance. It meant shaping the outcome. Inside the building, the test unfolded quietly. Men entered expecting resistance. Instead, they encountered uncertainty. Doors closed without urgency. Paths narrowed. The man who listened felt it first. He realized survival was no longer random. It was selective. When he was brought before Bumpy, there was no interrogation. No threats. Just a question delivered calmly. "Why are you here?" The man answered honestly. Because lies wasted time. He spoke of orders, of money, of inevitability. Bumpy listened, then asked another question. "Why you?" That pause was the moment everything shifted. Bumpy saw the difference between a soldier and a witness. Killing them all would end the night. Letting one live would extend it. The message required a carrier, someone who understood what he had seen. Violence could not explain restraint. Only survival could. The decision was not mercy. It was efficiency. One man would leave carrying clarity. The rest would not be remembered individually. They would become absence, a silence that invited interpretation. Bumpy understood how stories traveled. He chose the version that would last. In that moment, dominance changed hands. Not through gunfire, but through selection. Schultz had sent 12 men to impose fear. Bumpy returned one to deliver meaning. The difference was permanent. By the time the survivor stepped back into the night, he understood his role. He was no longer an enforcer. He was evidence. Proof that Harlem was governed by someone who did not need to explain himself. The massacre was never the point. The choice was. The pressure that night did not come from bullets, but from realization. Men sensed they were being measured, weighed against something older than orders. The walls carried memory. The silence responded with judgment. Every step forward removed another assumption about control. The survivor felt it settle into him as responsibility. He would be believed because he had lived. Because survival rewrote credibility. No speech could compete with that authority. Bumpy had understood this long before Schultz ever imagined violence could speak for him. As the building emptied, Bumpy returned to stillness. There was nothing to celebrate. The outcome had been decided before the first footstep. This was not escalation. It was correction. Harlem would hear what mattered, not through noise, but through absence and return. Somewhere across the city, Dutch Schultz waited for confirmation, expecting finality. What he would receive instead was continuity, Harlem intact, authority unshaken, a single voice carrying more weight than 12 guns ever could. This was the moment inevitability replaced danger. The risk had passed. Control had chosen its owner. From here forward, nothing would be rushed. Nothing would be explained. The test was complete, and the answer was already moving through the streets. What remained was understanding. Schultz would learn it indirectly, through tightened alliances and closed doors. The survivor would never forget the calm that had spared him. He carried that weight because he had been chosen, not spared randomly. That distinction would haunt him longer than fear. In the underworld, meaning outlived violence. Bumpy Johnson knew this, and he used it precisely. The threat had formed, tested, and collapsed inward. What stood now was certainty, carried quietly by one man walking away from the night with instructions he did not need to repeat aloud. Power had changed hands without asking permission. By the time he reached the street, the survivor no longer trusted his own breathing. Each step away from the building felt unauthorized, as if the city itself might correct the mistake at any moment. He did not feel spared. He felt selected, and selection carried obligation. Bumpy Johnson's voice followed him long after the door closed. It had not risen. It had not rushed. The calm was deliberate, almost instructional. Bumpy did not explain what had happened inside those walls. He did not need to. Explanation would have diluted certainty. The words were simple. Harlem was not for sale. Fear was not currency. And Dutch Schultz had mistaken noise for leverage. That was all. No warnings attached. No consequences listed. The meaning was complete without them. The survivor understood the assignment immediately. He was not told to threaten. He was not told to negotiate. He was told to repeat exactly what he had heard. Nothing more. Precision mattered. Tone mattered. Any deviation would expose weakness, and weakness would invite correction. As he moved through the night, his thoughts fractured. He replayed the stillness inside the building, the absence where men should have been, the way control had shifted without announcement. He realized that violence had been present only as potential, never as performance. That restraint unsettled him more than brutality ever could. He had worked for men who shouted, men who needed reactions to feel powerful. Bumpy had required none. The authority came from alignment, not intimidation. Harlem aligned itself naturally around him because stability felt safer than chaos. That realization landed slowly, like weight. When the survivor reached Dutch Schultz's territory, his hand steadied. Fear transformed into clarity. He understood that delivering the message was not dangerous. Altering it would be. Schultz expected drama. What he would receive was disappointment, and disappointment eroded confidence faster than threats. Bumpy's response was not retaliation. It was positioning. By allowing the attempt, he had revealed Schultz's limits. Schultz had escalated publicly and achieved nothing privately. That imbalance would spread. Men would notice. Silence would follow. The survivor did not describe the building. He did not describe the missing men. He repeated the words exactly as given. Harlem is not for sale. Fear is not currency. The room went quiet. Schultz listened without interruption, because interruption would have acknowledged uncertainty. What went unsaid carried more force than what was delivered. Bumpy had demonstrated reach without display. He had shown that outcomes could be shaped invisibly. Schultz's predictability was now a liability, and liabilities attract pressure. As the survivor finished, he understood his role was complete. He had not been spared to switch sides. He had been spared to witness structure. That distinction mattered. He would carry it with him long after alliances shifted. Back in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson returned to routine. There was no celebration, no reinforcement needed. Power that required repetition was already fading. His response had moved quietly through the city, settling into conversations, altering expectations, closing options. True authority did not demand acknowledgement. It arranged reality until acknowledgement became unavoidable. Bumpy had answered the threat without raising his voice, and in doing so, he had removed the need for further response. What remained was control, exercised without explanation, felt everywhere at once. It was understood without being discussed. From that night forward, nothing involving Harlem would move quickly again. Decisions would slow. Certainty would replace urgency. Men would speak less and listen more. That was the shift Bumpy created. Not fear, but order. Not obedience, but alignment. Those who recognized it adjusted and survived. Those who did not would feel the consequences later, quietly, without spectacle. Power had spoken once. It would not need to repeat itself. The lesson lingered in every corner, shaping choices long after voices faded, proving that restraint, when mastered, outlasts aggression in any era and defines who truly governs men forever. The message reached Dutch Schultz without ceremony. No phone rang. No intermediary requested a meeting. Nothing arrived directly because nothing needed to. Reputation carried it faster than any courier ever could. 12 went in. 1 came out. And Harlem did not react. That detail unsettled Schultz more than the loss itself. Violence he understood. Silence he did not. Cities were supposed to respond to force with panic or submission. Harlem offered neither. Business continued. Streets remained steady. No territory shifted hands. It was as if nothing had happened, and that absence became impossible to ignore. Men began speaking carefully around Schultz. Not openly defiant, just less certain. Questions replaced affirmations. Suggestions softened. The edge he relied on dulled without announcement. He noticed doors that once opened immediately now required waiting. Meetings shortened. Promises became conditional. Schultz had not challenged a man. He had challenged an order that existed before him and would continue after him. Bumpy Johnson did not need to appear for that truth to spread. Others carried it naturally, adjusting their behavior to match reality. Alliances shifted without declarations. No one announced a change in loyalty. They simply recalibrated. Risk assessments evolved. Harlem was removed from future calculations involving force. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was stable. Stability resisted disruption more effectively than aggression ever could. Schultz felt the erosion slowly. That made it worse. Sudden collapse could be blamed on chance. This was systematic. Each day brought a small correction, a minor exclusion, a subtle reminder that momentum had moved elsewhere. Authority, once questioned, rarely recovered fully. He replayed the decision to send the men, searching for the error. Numbers, timing, personnel. The flaw was none of those. The flaw was assumption. He had assumed fear could be imposed indefinitely. He had assumed resistance required escalation. Bumpy Johnson had shown otherwise by refusing to participate theatrically. In Harlem, there was no celebration, no stories embellished beyond necessity. The event did not become legend immediately. It became precedent. Bumpy returned to routine operations because routine was the point. Power that interrupted itself was unstable. Power that resumed calmly communicated permanence. Those watching understood the distinction. Bumpy had not won anything publicly. He had maintained something privately. That maintenance altered the landscape more effectively than conquest ever could. Harlem remained intact, not because it was defended loudly, but because it was governed consistently. Schultz continued operating, but now with limitation. His reach stopped where Harlem began. The boundary was invisible, yet absolute. That was the cost of misjudgment. Not destruction, but exclusion. He remained powerful, but no longer unquestioned. The reckoning was not a confrontation. It was a recognition. Men recalculated their futures based on what they had seen, and more importantly, what they had not. The absence of chaos became evidence of control. Bumpy Johnson never addressed the outcome. He did not need to. The city responded for him. Conversations changed. Plans adjusted. Authority settled where it belonged. Public power always followed private control. That night had proven it without spectacle. Dutch Schultz learned the lesson indirectly, through diminishing options and tightening limits. Harlem remembered it directly, through continuity. The reminder had been delivered, quietly, permanently. The story did not spread the way violent legends usually do. There were no exaggerated numbers, no heroic speeches, no public trophies. What endured was restraint. Men remembered that 12 had entered and 1 had returned, but more than that, they remembered what had not happened. Harlem had not collapsed. No war followed. Life continued. That continuity became the legend. Bumpy Johnson's reputation did not grow through fear, but through predictability. People knew where he stood, what he allowed, and what he would never tolerate. That clarity removed the need for constant enforcement. Order sustained itself because it had been proven once, decisively, without noise. Those who understood power recognized the lesson immediately. Violence attracts attention, but attention invites challenge. Silence, when backed by certainty, discourages inquiry altogether. Bumpy never needed to chase respect. It arrived on its own, carried by memory rather than rumor. Years later, men would still reference that night indirectly, not as a warning, but as a boundary, a reminder that Harlem operated under rules older than ambition and stronger than intimidation. Outsiders learned to adjust not because they were threatened, but because outcomes had already been demonstrated. This moment mattered because of what could have happened and did not. It showed that dominance did not require spectacle. Control did not require explanation. Authority did not require repetition. Once established properly, it simply existed. Loud power fades because it depends on reaction. Quiet authority echoes because it reshapes behavior long after the moment passes. That distinction separates men who seize influence briefly from those who shape environments permanently. Bumpy Johnson understood that legacy was not built on how much damage one could inflict, but on how much chaos one could prevent. He left behind no manifesto, no speeches, no claims. Only a reputation that continued working without him present. In every room that mattered, the lesson endured. The most dangerous man in the room is the one who doesn't need to prove it. History remembers restraint longer than rage, because silence, once respected, governs choices long after threats lose their meaning across generations and territories forever.